Mexico City had grown a new skin while I was. The plan was simple: finish school, come back, study at UNM. Instead, I stayed in Baja California for 32 years. I became a professor, built a life, and convinced myself the capital was just a place I used to be. In 2023, university offered me a visiting semester. While I looked for a room near campus, I moved back into the house where I would grown up. My mother, Sylvia, still lived there. She had aged the honest way: silver hair, softer hands, a calm in her eyes that made the rooms feel safer than they were. Outside our gate, everything was wrong. The streets had been redrawn. Old neighbors were gone. New buildings leaned where empty lots used to breathe. Even the air smelled different, more exhaust than dust. But the city kept one habit I remembered. After a certain hour, it could empty itself in minutes. In Mexico City, night does not fall. It shuts. My first week teaching blurred into lectures and metro rides. I came home around 10, stepping out of the station to Portales streets that looked abandoned on cue. Shops dark, shutters down, dogs moving like smoke. On the 7th night, distracted and half thinking about my students' papers, I reached the corner by the station, and a woman stepped into my path so suddenly, my chest clenched. We both jumped. A stack of spiral-bound documents slipped from her hand and slapped the pavement. I apologized and helped her pick them up. She thanked me with a low, steady voice. Then her fingers closed around my wrist, lightly, as if she were checking that I was real. "Esilio de Sevilla?" she asked. The name hit me harder than a near collision. Nobody in the neighborhood used my mother's first name anymore, not with that certainty. I stared at the woman's face, searching for recognition. "You remember me?" she added, almost amused. I looked into her eyes, then the shape of her cheeks and nose, and memory produced an old image, like a photograph pulled from a drawer. "Doña Estela," I said, "the neighbor from across the street." "Of course," she replied, and her mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. She wore a worn wool sweater and a heavy skirt down to her ankles. Her hair was dry and stiff, gray at the roots, and dyed a sickly blonde long ago. Nothing about her looked modern. Nothing about her looked modern. She released my wrist and said, "Send my regards to Silvita." The nickname landed like grit under my tongue. "Tell her I am still here." I walked home with my keys hot in my palm. My mother was asleep. I did not mention the encounter, not because I was hiding it, but because the mind is lazy with the harmless. The next night, Doña Estela was at the same corner, and the next. It became routine, a greeting, a message from my mother, then her gaze drifting back to the metro entrance, as if she were waiting for someone else. I told myself the obvious thing, that she was old and lonely and using me as a familiar face. I even tried to fix the arithmetic with excuses. Maybe she had a daughter I never knew. Maybe I would mistaken her for someone similar. But each time she took my hand, the touch was the same: dry skin, small fingers, the calm confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed. The number kept screaming in my head anyway. If that was truly Doña Estela, she should have been well past 100. After that request, she did not move right away. She stood at the corner as if making sure the city itself had heard. A bus passed without stopping. A couple hurried by and did not look at her, did not even seem to register that an old woman and a tall man were standing beside a water jug. The street lamp buzzed and dipped, and for a second her face flattened into shadow. "Is someone meeting you?" I asked, trying to keep it friendly. She blinked once, slow. "Yes." "Family?" "No." Her answers came late, like an echo. When I shifted my weight, her eyes followed, not my face, my throat, my hands, the place where a pulse can be measured. I laughed awkwardly and told myself it was my imagination, the kind that blooms when you are alone at night. Then she looked past me, toward the metro stairs, and said, almost gently, "You came back." The way she said it was not a greeting. It sounded like a conclusion. 2 weeks into the semester, she did not just greet me. "Profe," she said, like she would been hearing the word for years. "Can you help me with my garrafon? I cannot carry it anymore." Large water jugs stood beside her on the sidewalk, upright like an accusation. Refusing felt like pushing an old woman into traffic. So I nodded. "Of course," I said. She touched my wrist again, light, guiding, certain, and a thought arrived with the cold clarity of a knife. What if she has not been waiting for the metro at all? What if she's been waiting for me? She led the way as if the garrafon were already on my shoulder. I lifted it, and the plastic bit into muscle immediately, sloshing with each step. She walked half pace ahead, straight-backed, not once offering to help, not once turning to check if I was still following. The route was almost safe in blocks. At that hour, the neighborhood felt staged, corners too quiet, trees too still, the occasional car passing like a mistake. I tried conversation to dull the discomfort. "So you still live in the same house?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Do you live with anyone now?" No answer. "What were you doing by the station every night?" She made a small sound. It might have been agreement, or might have been nothing at all. When I asked again, she said, "Waiting," without specifying for what. The word made my skin tighten, because I could not tell if she meant waiting in general, or waiting for a particular moment. Halfway there, she stopped to let a stray dog cross. The dog looked at her once and lowered its head, tail tucked, and hurried away. Doña Estela did not react. She stood with her hands folded, eyes fixed on the animal, till it vanished into a dark driveway. Then she continued walking, the decision final. When we reached her street, the houses looked older, lower, as if the rest of the city had grown around them and forgotten them. She stopped in front of a gray facade with a black iron gate. I remembered the shape of it from childhood, in the way you remember a stair you once fell down. She dropped her keys. The metal clinked against the sidewalk, and the sound felt too loud. She bent with a slow, awkward stiffness, picked them up, and unlocked the gate with careful patience. The hinges did not squeal. The gate opened like it had been oiled that morning. "Thank you," she said again, and this time her voice sounded closer, as if the air had carried it. Inside, the small courtyard was spotless. No leaves, no dust, not even the usual grime at the bottom of walls. She opened the front door and gestured for me to enter. "Just to the kitchen," she said. "Please." Stepping over someone else's threshold at night should feel ordinary. It did not. My body noticed the boundary as if it were a temperature change. The air inside was cool and dry, and it smelled wrong. Not rotten, not dirty, clean, but aggressively so, saturated with herbal notes that did not belong to any normal home. I smelled dried mint, camphor, eucalyptus, and something earthen underneath, almost medicinal, like the inside of a wooden drawer, where ointment has been stored for years. There were no bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling, no candles, no obvious clutter. The smell existed without a source, like a mood. She moved through the house with an unhurried certainty. The hallway walls were bare. The floor tiles shone. The living room looked unused, like a room set aside for someone who never arrives. In the kitchen, she pointed to a spot near the counter. I set the garrafon down, rolled my shoulder, and felt sweat cooling along my back. My heart was beating too fast for the effort. "You want water?" she asked. "Sure," I said, because politeness is a chain people wrap around their own throats. She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a glass pitcher. The water inside was clear and cold enough to fog the glass. She poured with steady hands and offered it to me. The first swallow was a relief. The second was colder than it should have been, as if it carried a thin metallic bite. I told myself it was the glass, the fridge, my imagination. Then I lifted my eyes. For the first time since our nightly meetings, I saw her face under a bright, honest light. My mind refused to name what it noticed. It reached for explanations, and found none that fit. Her face was crooked, not deformed, not swollen, crooked like a thing placed slightly wrong. Her cheeks, mouth, and nose were where they were supposed to be, yet nothing aligned. It took me a few seconds to understand why my stomach was turning. The face was not her face. It was a mask, not glossy porcelain, not a theatrical prop. It looked matte, like dry plaster or hardened clay, a surface too smooth to be skin and too dull to be ceramic. The edges sat oddly near her jawline, and along the sides of her neck, there were faint lines where something met something else. Her real skin pressed a little farther back, as if the mask had been pressed down and fused. She spoke, and I watched her mouth. The lips did not move. The words came out anyway, low and calm, as if produced from somewhere behind the mask, somewhere deeper in her chest. When she breathed, the mask did not change. No softness, No micro-expressions, only the sound of a person speaking through a face that had been remembered, not lived. My hand tightened around the glass until my knuckles ached. Her eyes were worse. I had not noticed them well under the street lamp. Here they sat in shadowed hollows, too deep, too still, reflecting the overhead light, where marbles reflected, glassy, dusted, unblinking. It was not that they were dead. It was that they were waiting. She turned slightly, and the mask caught the light at a different angle. I saw it stretch across one cheekbone, as if the material had been smoothed too hard, pulled to mimic youth, and the effort had left it strained. I caught myself thinking absurdly that whoever made it had studied a human face from memory, then tried to rebuild it like a sculpture. The room narrowed. The herbal smell thickened until it felt like it was coating my tongue. "Thank you for the water," I managed. "I should go." For a beat, she did not respond. Then she said softly, "Wait." She moved toward the front door. My instincts woke up like a dog snapping from sleep. Anxiety flooded me with no story attached, only certainty. Something bad was about to happen, something my brain had not yet caught up to. Doña Estela reached the door, not in a hurry. She placed her hand near the lock with a practiced motion. I heard the mechanism slide. I did not think about robbery or kidnapping. My mind reached for mundane stories because it hated the other options. Maybe she locked it out of habit. Maybe she was afraid of the neighborhood. Maybe she was protecting herself, not trapping me. But the air inside the house felt arranged, like it had been waiting in that exact shape. The herbal smell thickened on my skin. The refrigerator hummed with a steady patience. Even the silence had weight, the kind that presses on your ears when a room is listening. And Doña Estela's eyes, those glassy, unblinking eyes behind a face that would not move, were fixed on me with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided what would happen next. A small sound, metal on metal, the simple click of a bolt, yet it carried a meaning my body understood immediately. Some doors do not lock to keep you out, they lock to keep you in. I set the glass down so carefully, it felt like laying a bomb on a table. "I really need to go," I said. Doña Estela did not rush me. She took one slow step toward the hallway, then another, as if giving the house time to settle around me. The mask stayed serene, but her eyes tracked my hands. I understood suddenly that she did not need to grab me. She only needed me to hesitate. My legs chose for me. I crossed the kitchen in a burst and shoved at the iron gate with everything I had. It swung open hard, too easy, way an animal trap snaps when you finally fight it. I stumbled into the street, lungs burning, and still did not look back. I ran as if the sidewalk had turned to water. The neighborhood was empty in the worst way. No witnesses, no noise to prove I existed. A car passed at the end of the block, and its headlights swept over the gray facade behind me. I felt, without seeing it, that something was standing there, watching with the patience of stone. At the first crossing, I nearly tripped on the curb. At the median, my foot skidded on loose gravel. Each mistake came with a spike of terror, the childish certainty that the ground itself wanted me down. The sensation of being washed stayed glued to the back of my neck, a fingertip pressing where the spine meets the skull. I'm overreacting, I tried to tell myself between breaths. It is an old woman. It is stress. It is the smell. It is the water. The problem with logic is that it can explain a feeling without removing it. By the time I reached my mother's gate, my hand was shaking so badly I could not get the key into the lock. I pounded the door instead, once, twice, then kept hitting it because I could not stop. Sylvia opened it with her robe tied tight and her face already worried. Warm light spilled onto my chest. For a second, my body wanted to melt into the doorway like wax. "Tomas," she said. "What happened?" I stepped inside and shut the door behind me with my whole shoulder. Only then did I allow myself to breathe, shallow and fast. "I ran into someone," I said, and my voice sounded wrong in my own ears. My mother touched my arm. "You were shaking. Do you remember Doña Estela?" I asked. I hated how small the question sounded compared to what I felt. Sylvia nodded, cautious. "Paloma's mother. The gray house," I said. "Across the street. I've been seeing her. By the metro." My mother's eyes went flat, as if she had turned inward to check something old and locked away. When she spoke, she lowered her voice. not for secrecy, but for respect, like you lower your voice near a sleeping animal. That is not Doña Stella, she said. You mean the one with the mask? My stomach dropped so hard, I felt it in my knees. You know about it, I whispered. Sylvia's mouth tightened. Of course I do. She did not ask how I would noticed. She did not ask what I would seen. The way she accepted it was worse than disbelief. It meant the neighborhood had been carrying this thing for years, and I had walked back into it like a child returning to a game. She is a bruja, my mother said, the word simple, exhausted, and she is not new. Air refused to enter my lungs for a moment. My vision tightened at the edges. A pressure rose from my stomach to my chest, as if my body were trying to push something out, because the word mask had unlocked a memory, not a dream, not a nightmare I would invented from old fear. A scene, sharp and factual, buried under years of denial. I saw myself small again, 12 years old, standing near the same gray house in daylight. I could not tell you why I was there, fetching a ball, running an errand, chasing something stupid and harmless. What I remember is the moment she turned, and the mask was not on, or maybe it had slipped. Maybe the lie had loosened for a second. Underneath, her skin was dried and cracked, pulled tight over bones if the face had been left too long in the sun. The color was wrong, not quite flesh, not quite bone, an exhausted mixture of gray, yellow, and a bruised green, like fruit that has rotted while keeping its shape. In places beneath the eyes and along the chin, the skin went translucent, showing a web of veins that looked petrified, emptied of blood, and still clinging to their pattern. Her mouth had no real lips. It opened, but not into an expression a human uses. It was a hinge. Her eyes were set too far forward, as if someone had forced them into place. They were not wet. They did not shine. They were dull, yet they followed movement with perfect attention, like the lenses of an old camera tracking a target. The horror was not gore. The horror was wrongness so complete, my brain tried to refuse it. Even her hair looked unnatural, dry, dyed that same diseased blonde, but attached in a way that made my scalp prickle. It seemed cooked into her skin, grafted, not grown. Between strands, I saw dark pores, holes like coral, as if her head were not a head, but a surface that had been made. I had spent decades calling that image a nightmare, because the alternative was impossible. I told myself I would made it up. I told myself it came from stories, from movies, from a child's fear of old women in dark houses. But my mother's voice cut through the denial like a wire. You saw her once, Sylvia said. When you were little. That is why you could not sleep your first months in Tijuana. Remember? I swallowed and tasted cold water again. My hands started shaking harder. Sylvia held my face between her palms and forced me to meet her eyes. Listen to me. Do not go back there. Do not answer her. Do not let her touch you. She already did, I said, and my voice broke on the admission. She grabbed my wrist. She made me carry the water. I drank. My mother's fingers tightened, then released. For the first time, I saw fear crack through her calm. You drank? She asked. I nodded. Sylvia stepped back as if the word had weight. She crossed herself once, fast, then again more carefully, and in that motion, she looked older than she had a minute before. There are rules, said. Her tone was not superstition, but the weary firmness of someone reciting safety instructions learned the hard way. The corner by the metro is a crossing. People come out of underground and think they are still half asleep. That is why she waits there. What does she want? I asked. My mother hesitated, and the hesitation felt like kindness. Then she said, she wants what everyone wants when they are running out of time. Sylvia reached for the chain lock on our door and slid it into place with clean click. The sound made my spine tense. Tonight you stay inside, she said, and you do not open the door for anyone, not for a neighbor, not for a voice you recognize, not even for me, if you think you hear me on the other side. I tried to laugh to make it smaller, but nothing came out. My mother leaned closer and whispered a sentence that did not feel like advice. It felt like a verdict. Once she decided you were familiar, Sylvia said, she stops asking. Sylvia made me wash my hands 3 times. Soap, salt, then soap again, like she was trying to scrub off something that was not dirt. When she lifted my wrist under the kitchen light, A faint red ring circled it where Doña Estela had held me. It was not a bruise yet. It looked more like a thin cord had been tied there and removed. "Do not scratch it," my mother warned. "If it itches, ignore it." "It already itches," I admitted, and the shame of sounding scared made my throat tighten. She brewed chamomile and did not let me drink it until she murmured a prayer over the cup, not loud enough to be theatrical, just precise, as if the words had to be said in the correct order. The house felt smaller. The air smelled normal, coffee, detergent, yet every now and then it caught a ghost of camphor, the same medicinal earthiness from the gray house, as if the smell had followed me like pollen. Later, when my mother finally fell asleep on the couch, I lay in my childhood room staring at the ceiling, listening. The city outside stayed too quiet. Around midnight, there was a soft scrape at our gate, then a pause, then another, not a knock, more like a fingernail testing metal. I held my breath. A voice drifted through the door, low and patient. "Silvita." My mother did not move. She was asleep, mouth slightly open, exhausted. The voice came again, sweeter this time, as if practicing affection. "Open up. It is me." And for one terrifying second, the voice sounded exactly like my mother's. Somewhere outside, far down the street, a dog began to howl, one long, broken note that sounded less like fear and more like warning. And in my mind, it's clear as if someone had spoken into my ear. I heard Doña Estela's calm voice from the metro corner. "You came back." Morning arrived like an apology the city did not mean. Sunlight filled the kitchen and tried to make everything ordinary. My mother frying eggs, the neighbor's radio playing softly through a wall, the scent of detergent rising from the patio. Yet the ring on my wrist was darker now, not purple like a bruise, but a thin line the color of dried blood. It itched with a slow insistence. Sylvia saw me rubbing it and slapped my hand away without anger, only urgency. "You do not touch it," she said. "If you touch it, you accept it." "Accept what?" I asked. My mother sat down across from me and looked older than she had the night before, as if remembering had cost her sleep. "A favor," she said. "A door. A name. It is all the same thing with her." I wanted facts, the kind I could teach, dates, proof, something I could hold up to my own mind and say, "This is real, and here is why." Sylvia gave me the nearest thing she had. When I was a child, she told me, Portales had rules that were not written anywhere. Do not walk alone past the gray house after dark. Do not take anything from that woman, not candy, not water, not a harmless blessing whispered in your ear. And above all, if she asks your name, you lie. If she uses your mother's name, you pretend you did not hear. "She does not steal bodies," Sylvia said. "She steals places." I did not understand. My mother opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph, curled at the edges. It showed our street decades earlier, sun harsh, shadows sharp. In the background was the gray house, and beside its gate stood a woman in a long skirt. Even in the grainy print, her face looked too smooth, too pale, like it had been painted on. Sylvia tapped the photo with one finger. "That picture was taken before you were born," she said. My mouth went dry. "So she has always been there," my mother confirmed. Different faces, same eyes. She told me a story her own grandmother used to repeat, half prayer, half threat. There are witches in the city who survive by wearing what they take, not a costume, a borrowed front. They do not need candles or circles. They need permission, small, stupid permissions. People give without noticing. A drink of water, a hand on your wrist, a favor carried home. "Why the metro corner?" I asked. "Because people come out confused," she said. "Half above, half below. It is easier to step over a line you do not see." Sylvia leaned closer, voice dropping. "And because the metro is full of the lost, full of names." The brutal truth landed slowly, like weight shifting on a beam. Doña Estela, Paloma's mother, had died when I was in high school. I had been gone so long I had not heard. The woman at the corner was not an old neighbor who would somehow refuse time. She was something wearing the memory of an old neighbor like a face. The rest of the day I stayed inside, pretending to work, watching the street to the kitchen window as if the glass were armor. The itch on my wrist turned hot. Around sunset, a thin smell of camphor drifted into the house with no wind to carry it. Sylvia locked the door before it was even dark. At 10, the street outside emptied again, on cue, like a stage clearing for the next act. I told myself I would not look. I told myself it did not matter if she stood there or not. Still, I drifted to the window. At the corner by the metro, a lone figure waited beneath the street lamp. Long skirt, worn sweater, a pale face that did not belong under electric light. She raised one hand, and from that distance, I knew exactly where her eyes were aimed. Not at our house, at me. Then, very slowly, she lifted her other hand to her cheek, and I saw the edge, just a millimeter of separation, where something matte met real skin underneath, like a seam, beginning to loosen. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering, and heard my mother's last warning from the night before, sharp as a nail. Never answer a voice that sounds like love when it is coming from the dark. Behind the front door, something scratched once, soft, patient, like a fingernail learning the